So in this lesson, we are going to be connecting to the posts that are contained within the local server database, as well as doing some troubleshooting and returning back content from the database, and then outputting that content on the page. So we don't have that yet, but we're outputting into the console. We also have the option to make new items, so specifying the title and getting back an ID. So now when we load it to the page, we're also going to have that brand new one that was just created. So that's in this lesson where we're going to be constructing the basic structure for making get and post requests to our local server endpoint, and then also updating the data within the database. In this lesson, we are going to be connecting to our local server. So just make sure that your local host port 3000 is up and running, and then you've got some content within your JSON database. So connecting to it, and we're going to be connecting to it through the front-end code, HTML and JavaScript. So I've got a basic structure here where we've got an input field, a button, and an output area, and that's all contained within the main container element. So opening up the JavaScript, let's make some connections. And first we'll select the container object using the document and query selector. Select the element with a class of container. So we'll add that into one of our objects. I'm also going to update the view on the editor so that we can see everything within one page. Let's select the other elements from the page as well. So we've got our button. So that's the button one, and this can act as a submit button, so the element with the class of button, and selecting the element, the input element with a class of value, and then also we'll select the output element. So adding in all of those, so we've got the value, and this is going to be the input area with the class of value, and then lastly the output area where we can output the results from our request, return values from the request object. And for the button one, add an event listener. The event listener that we're adding for is going to be a click. So whenever it gets clicked, that's going to fire off the event. And for now, we're going to log it out into the console that we're ready to go to make our fetch request. So let's select, and we've got ready. So that means that we are ready to make our fetch request. So starting, and let's set up a URL. This is going to be where our base URL is, and that's going to be the local server. So just running over to the local port, localhost 3000. And this is only for local testing, so you typically would have a real endpoint, server endpoint on a real database. So that's why we're just using the local host. So selecting, and let's make our fetch request. So fetch and construct a URL, and the URL is going to use the base URL and add to it, so append to it, and the endpoint that we're appending to it is going to be the posts. So that should return back all of the post content, and for now we're just going to do a get method. So getting the content, so the response object, and then returning back the response object with JSON data. And next promise is we get the data. And for now, we're just output into the console just to make sure that everything is working as expected. So going in, click, and there's our data. And so this is the live data that's coming from the actual data content. And for this application, we're just going to work with the posts. I know I do have some additional options there, additional routes. So I've got comments, and I've got profile and tester. So there's a bunch of other routes, but we're going to focus on the posts, and the other routes are going to work the same way where we can make requests. So let's go ahead and add to the database. So this was a typical fetch request where we load the page contents, and we'll want to load it out onto the page. So you can create a function and get page contents, and then that can just take in the data value, and we'll just move the console message and this is where we can load the page contents. So we also want to have a post request to the posts endpoint, and this is how we can add to the existing content. So within the database, we've got the option for title. So that's the only input field, and we'll just use whatever value is here that we have the input field, and then we're going to use the default author. So they're all going to have the same author. The only thing that's going to be different between them is going to be the input. So we need to append and add a separate button. And we can actually use the initial button that we have, the button 1, and I'll update the text content. And then we'll add the event listener that's going to load all of the post content. We're going to load that using the DOM content loaded function. So it's going to automatically load and make the fetch request. So selecting the text content, and this can just create new. And we're going to take the input value and create a new one for that. So using the window, add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is DOM content loaded. And when that fires off, for now we'll just log into the console and do page ready, and just make sure that that's working. So that is working. So that means that we can update this fetch request and just load all of the page contents. So whenever the page loads, it's automatically going to load all of the page content. And now for the post of the content into the database, let's update and send using the post method. So we need to make some updates to this request. We're going to set an object, and this will contain the options, and this is an object format. And with the fetch request, we're going to now send it with options, and I can console log out the returned data. And for the options, the endpoint is going to be the same where we're posting content to it. So let's update within the options, and for this JavaScript object, so we've got a method, and the method that we want to use is going to be a post method, and then comma separated out. And the contents that we want to post, so that's going to be contained within the body of the object. So let's construct the body, and this is going to be an object itself. So that way we can use JSON stringify and stringify the body object so that it posts as a string. And within the body object, so whatever values we want contained in there, we can construct the body contents. So let's set up a title, and the title is going to be the value of the val1 value. So val1 value, and that should just be value. And also for author, and we're going to hard code the author. And of course you can have input fields and change the author and add whatever values you want. So doing a post, and one last parameter that we need is we need the headers. So let's set up the headers within the object. So we want to specify the content dash type, and the content type that we're sending is going to be application /JSON. So sending it as JSON data, and then the semicolon, and let's set up the character set and equal that to UTF-8. So let's see how that works. So now we added in title test, and of course we're not posting the content properly into it, but it did create a new ID, and then it returned back the ID content. So we want to prevent the default action. So prevent default, and let's try that one more time. And I'll console log out the options just to see what we're passing through. And I also need to update this, so that should be character set. So let's try that, and new. So it is adding to the database. So we do need to do some troubleshooting to see why it's not passing in and accepting the JSON object, the body. And the problem actually is going to be where our database file is located, because it's in the same file directory as our live app, and the live server is actually doing a page refresh because the code has changed. So let's make a quick update to it, and I'll move the location of the database outside of this folder. And I just went into the terminal, I stopped and I restarted. So now our db.json file is actually going to be sitting somewhere outside of this main folder that we're working on, our workspace folder. So the live server now is no longer refreshing. So if we do a hello world, do a create new, and we see the response object being sent back with the JavaScript code, then we see that this actually got updated and we added to the database file. So whatever we type in here, so it's going to be all uppercase, we add in and we get the response of the ID back. In addition, let's add one more button to the page, and this button can add and just list out everything. So the same thing that we're doing when the window loads, so creating a brand new button object. And what I'll do is I'll create the function to create element, and the parameters it's going to require. So this is the parent, and then whatever type of element that we want to create, and then any of the HTML code that we want to add into it. So let's create the element, and using the document create element, and specifying the type of element that we want to create, and then the parent object, and using append, let's append the element to the page, and for the element, the inner HTML of the element, so set that as the HTML that got passed in, and then return back the element object. So this way we can create an element for the page. And let's add in a few other buttons to the page. So button 1 is going to load all of the content. So it'll be load content, or it should just say maybe load posts. And that way you can change it around if you want to add in to load the comments and so on. And I'll just update this to create my element instead of create element, to avoid any confusion with the create element function within the document object. So when we create an element and the type of element that we want to create, so in this case we're adding in a button, and it's going to say load posts, and the parent that we're adding it to, so let's also make sure that we're selecting all of the page elements, and we're going to add it into the container. So now we've got a button for loading the posts, so let's just add it into another div on the page. And we can also just create a function for this button event. So this will be just get all posts function, and we can add that as an event and update the event listener to just get all of the posts. And let's select that content, go down where we've got all of the posts, make a quick update to this, pass in the event object into it, so that if we need to prevent the default action, we can select and prevent the default action. And I'm just going to realign the content here. So we're still getting all of the posts whenever the page loads, so it's outputting here. And also we can add an event listener to button 2 that's going to load the posts. And I'm also going to take this content and create a function in order to handle it. So selecting the whole event object, And what this will do is this is going to load the add item, or I can call it add post. So this is just to simplify it and make things more readable. So function add post, and pass in the event object. And this is where I'm just going to paste in the post content. And I'm going to realign it. So just format and just beautify it through the editor. So it looks like I do have an error here. So add an extra rounded bracket. And let's make sure that this works. So create posts and go into the database. So we're able to create the new post. So that's working, and the load posts within the JavaScript. So add to button 1, and this can just do get all of the posts. So that we've got the two functions there. And I'm also, where we're adding to the post, I'll create an object value for title. And this way, if the title is blank, then whatever we want as a default title will get loaded. So let's update this value to include title. And then also for title or for value, we'll reset the value just to be blank. So once we've picked it up for adding to the post, we can just clear it out. And we won't need any of these console messages anymore. So let's save it and create a new one. So we created a default title with the author and ID. So that post has been added. Now when we do a loading of the posts, all of the content is there. So we want to load it all onto the page. So that's coming up next when we continue to build out this application. Tasks for this lesson are to connect to that local db.json file and get the contents of that file. So select all of the posts that are contained within the JSON file using the routing endpoint for the localhost port 3000/posts. Output the response JSON into the console, and then create an option for the user to use the post method to add content from the input field and post it to the database. So allowing the user to dynamically interact with the database content and add to it.